everybody, it's Jill here from JW Coaching and Consulting, and today I'm going to be talking about coaching and working with neurodiverse athletes. Neurodiverse means athletes that think differently than what we call neurotypicals. And by that I mean it could be people that have executive functioning issues, could be people that have ASD or learning disabilities or ADHD. So before we go any farther, I have a confession to make. I used to be one of those coaches who did not believe ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, was a real thing. I cringe as I say this, but there it is. I can remember years ago, as I was in the midst of coaching a group of young boys for an ice show number. I'm pretty sure we were doing Grease Lightning or one of those fun numbers. Now, these boys were a handful, and I had also been informed that several of them had ADHD. So I'm out there, I get told this, and of course I'm thinking to myself, right, all these kids need are a strong hand and some firm boundaries. Like, seriously, come on. So I cracked down. I was firm, I was strict. Hell, I ran that practice like a drill sergeant. And you know what? Those poor kids had no fun whatsoever. When I think back to that time, I can't believe how ignorant I was. I had no knowledge of ADHD, and I just assumed in my hubris that it was the result of inadequate parental discipline. I still shudder to think at my lack of empathy and understanding for those poor kids suffering with invisible conditions, as well as their parents who were doing their very best to help them under extremely difficult circumstances. So, moving forward in time, fate has a twisted sense of humor, and she decided I was in need of a serious karmic tune-up. The first person put in my path to teach me valuable lessons about invisible disabilities like ADHD, ASD, learning disabilities, the whole spectrum of possible neurodiversity, was a competitive skater. I'd worked with many recreational skaters in the past, and some kind of in, the lower levels of star skate competition. But I hadn't had the pleasure and the challenge to work closely for a long period of time with someone who was a higher level athlete. And I gotta say, it was really eye-opening. There were so many behaviors that I observed over the course of our years together that I was to learn were simply not in my athlete's control. And I experienced firsthand the struggles faced physically, mentally, and emotionally by these brave kiddos every single day. I also learned that despite all of my coaching experience, including my university degree, the thousands of dollars and hours spent on my NCCP coaching courses over the years, I'd received virtually no training in 20 years of coaching with my association. Up until that point in time, I should say, because this was about 20 years ago. So all of my training that I put in, not once had I encountered anything about how to coach neurodiverse athletes. And in fact, neurodiverse, neurotypical, these are actually new terms that are just becoming prevalent in the literature and the vernacular as we know it. I went to the doctor the other day and I dropped the neurodiverse and neurotypical, and he actually said to me, "Oh, is that what the term I'm supposed to use now?" He was even unaware. So working with this competitive athlete was like a real aha moment, and realizing that I hadn't been instructed or given any building blocks or a toolkit on how to deal with neurodiversity. It really made me want to work harder to learn as much as I could about conditions like ADHD, ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder, giftedness, which even though you think that that's not a problem, giftedness actually can be very difficult to deal with, dyslexia, processing disorders, executive function, which is basically the way we process information, how we sequence things, how we organize our time, so many others. And let me tell you, there's a lot to learn. So, after taking courses in learning disabilities and ADHD with different associations and colleges, I felt a little better equipped to be the best coach I could be for my skater. Then, fate hit me with the second of its 1-2 punch. I tell you, Karma, she really is I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Look, she was my miracle baby after years of infertility. And it quickly became apparent that there was something different about her. Not better, not worse, although she certainly demanded more of me than other babies and toddlers her age seem to demand of other parents. Just different. Sure enough, after years of research, advocating homeschooling, and fighting against judgment and stereotyping, I had a diagnosis for the differences I saw in my child. Well, one of possibly many diagnoses. My daughter has ADHD and anxiety and executive function issues and possibly Asperger's. Let's not forget possible dysgraphia or the possibility of processing issues. And I'm pretty sure she's gifted too. Now, before we go any further, I want to put a side note. I am completely aware that Asperger's has now been grouped under the autism umbrella and categorized as an autism spectrum disorder, ASD. But Asperger's and ASPI is the term that we have chosen to use. It just puts a more positive spin, and it's the way that she has chosen to identify, even though we don't have an official diagnosis yet. That's the term that we've chosen. So, I've got this new child. Suddenly I find out we've got all these things to deal with. Holy... On a personal level, I found out just how amazing, wonderful, frustrating, overwhelming, and draining it feels to be the parent of a kiddo with an invisible disability and superpower like ADHD. I'm not going to lie, though. Sometimes it can feel like I'm drowning. Everything is a psychological battle. You need to put lists everywhere. You're supposed to follow routine, but if she's gifted, then you have to be able to veer off the routine so that you can keep her attention. There's just so much to comprehend, and it's so difficult to get help or to even find people that know what they're talking about. There aren't a lot of experts out there, particularly dealing with girls in particular, some of these issues. Over the course of the years, as my daughter tried different activities like skating, karate, soccer, and dance, I was able to observe many different types of teachers and coaches and dance instructors as they worked with my daughter. As a coach, and I'm sure any of you that are coaches probably feel this too, I felt I had a unique viewpoint given the many years I've spent coaching, the number of coaching courses I've taken, and the work I've putting into learning how to better relate to my students. Along with that, my years parenting a neurodiverse child to really understand what it takes to teach kiddos with unseen disabilities. Unfortunately, more often than not, when I watch the coaches in these studios and soccer fields, I was disappointed. And I say this with the utmost respect to those amazing teachers and coaches and instructors and individuals that I've encountered who were fully educated about my daughter's needs, and those who did go over and above to help her and really individualize her learning experience. Some of my best friends are teachers, educational assistants, and coaches to special needs kiddos. So I see and appreciate those who actively work to make a difference every day. Unfortunately, most teachers, coaches, and dance instructors simply don't have the tools in their toolkit, the knowledge, and sadly, sometimes even the motivation to learn the techniques required to work with these kids. And I've even encountered coaches that, like me, when I was so ignorant, those many, many years ago, they don't believe that ADHD exists or that it's a question of the child is just not parented correctly. Even more unfortunately, most sports and educational institutions don't supply adequate training or compensation for their teachers or instructors who deal with children with special needs. And they're also equally lacking with resources and supports for those who need it most. I remember clearly my daughter coming home sobbing from school, not understanding why her teacher got mad for her not finishing her work on time, or why it took her so long to take off her outside clothes when she came in from recess before heading to class. Even though I stressed to her that my daughter struggled with executive functioning, working memory, and fine motor skills, all of which required more time and assistance to complete most tasks, her teacher was not able to give her the time, grace, or help she needed. I also remember a couple of my daughter's dance teachers making the students sit on the studio floor for long lectures, a task that is painful for kids with ADHD. I also watched them giving long lists of instructions or corrections that were difficult for my daughter to follow. And, in my opinion, the cruelest thing of all, telling the kids that only the students that could sit still and be quiet enough would be the only ones that would get the best parts in the dance. Of course, my daughter struggled with sitting still and being quiet. She was missing a developmental part in her brain. It was an actual brain deficiency. She was unable physically to sit still and be quiet, and they penalized her for it. My daughter felt unseen, unheard, and unworthy. She still actually has nightmares about that particular dance studio. We have since changed studios and are with a wonderful, inclusive studio where my daughter has found her love of dance again. But the damage was done. So, in an effort to save my fellow coaches some time as they work with athletes that may have these invisible disabilities, I thought I'd compile a list of the things I've experienced and information that I've researched in an effort to better help you help your students. Before we get started, I'd like to impart a few words of caution.